Hello everyone, my name is Emily Kosick and I'm the Knowledge Manager for the Canadian Institute for Public Safety Research and Treatment. Welcome to our talk, Spotlight on Research, the RCMP Study. Before we get started today, there are a few housekeeping items I want to go through. All attendees are in listen-only mode to limit feedback and noise. Today's session is being recorded. You'll be sent a copy tomorrow, so if you miss anything, you can watch it again. The GoToWebinar launch window can be blocked by some organizations. So if you're having trouble hearing or seeing, it may be that you have to join us by phone. We will be looking for audience questions at the end of the session, so please send us your questions either through the questions box or be ready to raise your hand to ask your question live. Though our speakers will be presenting in English today, a French copy of the PowerPoint has been placed as a handout for this session. You should be able to access them by clicking on the handout button itself. We will also be placing these French slides on the website with the video when we post it tomorrow. I am now pleased to introduce our speakers for today. Dr. Nick Carleton is a scientific director at CIPSRT and a professor in the Department of Psychology at the University of Regina. And Dr. Gregory Krasik is the Director of Research and Strategic Partnerships at Depot Division, the RCMP's Training Academy in Regina. And so I'm just going to go ahead and swap presentations for you here. Let me just quickly do that and we'll get going. All right, you should be able to see the presentation now, hopefully. Sometimes it's a little slow. All right, you're good to go.
Terrific. Thanks very much, Emily, and thanks everybody for joining us this afternoon or this morning, I guess, depending on where you are in Canada. We're going to be discussing the longitudinal study of operational stress injuries for RCMP this morning and this afternoon. Emily, if you'll please click the next slide. So we've both done our introductions. I don't think either Dr. Krasik or myself have any conflicts of interest to share, but he and I are both very pleased to be presenting this to you. It's been a very long-standing project with which we've both been engaged for many years now. Next slide, please. I want to start just by acknowledging that we have a tremendous amount of collaborators on the project, which you can visit our website to learn more about. There's dozens of team members that work to make this possible. It's also made possible by funding from the RCMP, the Government of Canada, the Ministry of Public Safety and Emergency Preparedness, and the development, analysis, and distribution of several of the pending articles has been generously supported by funding provided by the Medavie Foundation. Next slide, please. Dr. Krasik, I'll pass it to you.
Thank you. So this project has been multiple years in the making, and it finally came to fruition in 2019. But you know, there was lots of media attention and lots of attention, you know, for first responders based on recent events of number of suicides within Canada, but also a lot of attention being paid to occupational stress injuries within the first responder community and the need to do something about it because of the higher rates. There was a very important study that was done a number of years ago. It was a pan-Canadian study, and Dr. Nick Carleton was one of many researchers that led that research project. And it, for the first time, put a spotlight on the problem within first responder community. What you're seeing here really just shows the differences between the general public and the RCMP. But there is information for all the different first responder communities, and they're all incredibly high. So, for example, what you see there for the general public, that was obtained through Stats Canada, and that just shows the prevalence rate at any given time for PTSD or any of the other psychological disorders. For the RCMP, according to that study, those rates were incredibly high. As you can see, 30% screen positive for PTSD, also incredibly high for major depressive disorders. And, you know, so the PTSD is incredibly alarming. But then when you look at mental health disorders, 1 in 2 RCMP officers screen positive for at least one mental health disorder at any given time. And those are really, really alarming numbers when you compare that to the Canadian population. Next slide. So over the course of the past few years, a national action plan on post-traumatic stress disorders injuries was developed by the Government of Canada, and CIPSRT and the University of Regina play a real key role in that national action plan, and that has been written into law. I think it's Bill C-211. PSPNet is a critical part of that National Action Plan, CIPSRT and the CIHR Consortium, and then the RCMP study also makes up another major pillar of that National Action Plan on PTSI. Next slide. I also want to mention that the mandate letters for several of the federal ministers include addressing post-traumatic stress injuries within the first responder community. And in all of those mandate letters, the National Action Plan on PTSI is mentioned. So this is an incredibly important part of that overall National Action Plan, as it is in the mandate letters for, I think, at least 2 ministers, if not 3. So the PTSI study is a really good partnership between the RCMP and the University of Regina. As I stated, this really started with cadets in 2019. However, this was years in the making, and the University of Regina responded to a request for proposals through Public Works Canada to develop a project and address this firsthand with cadets. So this is a global first. There is absolutely nothing that we could ever find that did a study at this scale. I think we do a really good job addressing, treating, diagnosing PTSD and other PTSIs, but what we really don't know is the prospective end. And so what happens to first responders over the course of their career that leads them to develop a specific PTSI or PTSIs? And this is one of those things that we needed to really get a handle on. As Dr. Carleton can attest, and I'm sure others that might be on this call, when you typically have seen a first responder who's finally coming to a clinician for help, they're well into it. They're 20, 25, 30 years into the whatever they're being diagnosed with. So they haven't gone to a therapist earlier on in their career. But we do know that we often see RCMP members develop PTSD at a very, very early part of their career, but we really don't understand what makes one person more resilient than another. And then, maybe even a few years later, that person who might be resilient in year 3 all of a sudden now develops a PTSI in, let's say, year 7 or year 8. So we really needed to understand that, and that information is not available, and that's a really big gap in our understanding of PTSD. Next slide. The RCMP has a really good, robust list of benefits and programs to help support our members. Whether it's EAP, employee assistance programs, whether it's access to clinicians, leave with pay, long-term leave. We do a really, really good job there. But what we really need to do is find a better way to support our members earlier on in their career and find ways in which to get them help earlier, develop policies and procedures where we can start to address the development of PTSIs much earlier in their career. So this is one of those things that we really needed to address as far as our overall support of our members. And this prospective study does address most of the substantial gaps that we have known right now. So the goals of this study are quite lofty for sure, but it's a next step in really trying to identify the prevalence. Is that the, next slide, sorry, please. Yes, so what we want to do is we want to reduce the incidence and the prevalence of PTSIs. This is one of the main goals, and we want to do that through training. We want to do that through mental health monitoring and education. I can tell you that had we started or wanted to start the study even 10 years ago, there probably would have been a lot more resistance to it. But I think, with how much we are now talking about mental health and the importance of addressing mental health and all the education we're doing around that, it's becoming less stigmatized. And that's one of the things that we really need to address as well. There's lots of barriers in front of members that they will not go to see a therapist, and those stigmas really really prevent a lot of our members from going to seek help. But as we are increasing our conversation around mental health, we're starting to see a lot of those barriers reduce. And this study is going to be another means in which to address mental health and the prevalence of PTSIs within the community. Next slide. So we have broad support for the study, right from our commissioner, our current commissioner, and the previous commissioner, who was the one that initially supported this project. But that support has carried on. Jazz Breton, who used to be the commanding officer here at Depot, I think we're now on our fourth commanding officer since the inception of the study, and we had broad support from all four of our commanding officers here at Depot. We have broad support from the federal government, and we also have broad support from the president of the National Police Federation, which is the union, the new union that represents all RCMP officers. And I'll turn this back over to you, Dr. Carleton.
Thank you, Dr. Kratzek. Next slide, please. So as Dr. Kratzek said, the study has some very lofty goals. At a very high level, the study is designed to develop a set of tools that helps members to identify and manage stress early on so that we can get them earlier access to care and provide faster, better recovery. We also, though, want to provide specific recommendations for better assessment, treatment, and management, very broadly speaking of PTSI, certainly first for our RCMP, but we believe by extension for all public safety personnel. And ultimately, as cliche as it might sound, we really do want to help to produce some of the healthiest and most resilient members ever so that they can continue to do the good work that they do for all of us. Next slide, please. So we want to get down into some of the more nitty-gritty details of the research study. The research study design is set up first and foremost to develop, deploy, and assess the impact of a system that we are now using for ongoing evidence-based assessments of mental health and mental health-related variables, specifically of RCMP cadets and then RCMP members. We also want to evaluate associations between things like demographic variables and various PTSI. We want to also assess for individual differences associated with PTSI longitudinally. As Dr. Kratzek mentioned, there's huge gaps in literature there, and the only way to fill those gaps is with the painstaking, challenging, difficult longitudinal data collections that we are engaged in now, because that's how we can really speak to causation. That's how we can better understand the ebbs and flows of mental health over time so that we can provide better supports to protect all of our RCMP officers and ultimately all PSP. We also are going to be testing what happens when we augment the RCMP cadet training program at Depot with skills that proactively mitigate post-traumatic stress injuries. And we'll talk a bit more about that in a few minutes. And last, but certainly not least, we want to assess the differences between the standard program, so the extant program that exists at the cadet training program at Depot right now, and this new augmented training program. Because we really want to move away from clinically informed or clinically based and even evidence-informed practice into evidence-based practice when we start talking about providing interventions and training and treatment supports on all levels for our RCMP and for other PSP. And that's a big part of the project and a big part of the next steps. And certainly this is, I think, a first kind of a project, not a last kind of a project. Next slide, please. So at a high level, we really have two broad teams. We have Team 1, which is approximately 480 participating RCMP cadets, now RCMP members, and who are all receiving the standard cadet training program at Depot. This standard training program is augmented by the ongoing monitoring that we talked about, where our cadets have access to an extensive set of dashboards and information and monitoring support, all designed to engage them with their own mental health and to provide them with early identification of challenges and ongoing supports. Team 2 has all of the same ongoing monitoring tools that Team 1 has, but they're going to start after all of Team 1 has left Depot, and that's happened now, and they're going to receive some extraordinarily augmented training based on changes that we're making with the Depot facilitators themselves, with Depot leadership, and with Depot RCMP trainers. Next slide, please. So at a very high level, Team 1 and Team 2, they both in many ways encounter the study in the same kind of way. In week 1, they've got recruitment and onboarding for the study. Weeks 1 and 2, give or take a little bit, they complete their very first full assessment. Weeks 5, they move into their very first monthly assessment. Week 24 to 25, they move into the second full assessment. The second full assessment happens just before they're deployed from depot. Then after that, we repeat the same full assessment that we did at the first full assessment and the second full assessment every year for 5 years on their deployment anniversary. This really gives us a tremendous pre-training baseline, post-training baseline, and then follow-up measures at a very comprehensive level for 5 years thereafter. This is where we're getting that longitudinal data from so that we can really speak with authority to issues of causation change and differences in training, and where we can really identify ways to help. Next slide, please. So what goes into these full assessments? Well, the full assessments include a survey that takes about 75 minutes and that's the statistical average at time 1 and at time 2 for our participants. That's then followed by a clinical assessment. And like I said, that occurs at pre-training, post-training, and annually on their deployment anniversary. We don't convey diagnoses, but we do flag for any of our participants whether or not they might benefit from another assessment, whether they might benefit from talking to a mental health professional. But all of that feedback is provided to them confidentially, along with recommendations for mental health that they can choose to use in any way that they want. And those clinical assessments typically take about 60 minutes. So that's our full assessment package that we're doing 7 times, before training, after training, and then on the deployment anniversary for 5 years. Next slide, please. We supplement all of that with monthly assessments, and the monthly assessments include self-report screening of symptoms for several common mental health disorders that face our RCMP officers. It provides them with automated feedback and recommendations about what to do about the feedback that they're receiving. Those take about 20 minutes, and that regular screening means none of our participants go more than 30 days without being screened for several of the major mental health disorders and being provided with that automated feedback. So they have an opportunity to engage with and get ahead of their own mental health challenges in a way that we really haven't systematized for any group before this. Next slide, please. This all really works as a function of the platform providing the feedback to our RCMP participants. So I'm going to use an example here. They are provided with ongoing dashboard information about their average mood and their attitude and performance and their physical wellness as they've reported back to the study. But they're also provided with all kinds of mental health feedback. And so I'm picking on major depressive disorder in this case just as one example of the tools and the feedback they're receiving. You can actually see that our participants are given information that lets them know when their symptoms on any of the screening tools are starting to approach that clinical cutoff mark. And what we've seen now for several participants already is that the participants are monitoring their own mental health. And so as their mental health increases, as you can see it did here for this participant with major depressive disorder symptoms, the participant was then able to engage with additional help. They were able to reach out, they were able to talk to clinical supports, and they were able to get their symptoms back under control. So they never crossed the clinical cutoff line. We weren't waiting until they met diagnostic criteria or clinically significant criteria to have an intervention. So this is a tremendous step forward in and of itself. And this is our first demonstrative proof that in fact our RCMP members can do this kind of mental health engagement on their own and really take an active role in protecting their own mental health. Next slide, please. We support all of this with the opportunity for everybody to take about 60 seconds a day and reflect on the past 24 hours. And we already know from all kinds of other research that even taking 60 seconds a day just to reflect, to 60 seconds of mindfulness, if you will, to reflect on what's happened over the last day, and then to track how your own mental health and your own challenges change over time, really gives you an opportunity to improve your own mental health because you're monitoring it, but also gives you an opportunity to take that time for reflection. And we've got evidence that both of those things are inherently helpful in and of themselves. So just the monitoring can be helpful because you get early warnings and because you get a set of tools that allow you to take control of your own mental health. Next slide, please. Oh, there it is, perfect. So over time, this is actually allowing our participants to really make changes when they choose to and to really control how they're engaging with their mental health by monitoring their mood, their attitude, their physical wellness, and going, you know what, sometimes I'm having challenges, sometimes I'm not. Overall, I'm holding steady. It allows them to identify drops that have happened and then make changes to improve their mental health status or make behavioral changes to change the environment variables that are impacting their mental health far faster than they have been able to before. Next slide, please. We're also seeing that they're able to identify patterns in their own mental health. So something's going on, periodically, every Sunday or every Monday or every Tuesday, I'm having a change in my overall sleep. I'm having a change in my work. I'm having a change that is associated with my mental health. And by understanding that those patterns occur and those patterns exist, it gives the individual participants the opportunity to make broader changes. It gives them the opportunity to take that information to a mental health clinician of their choosing so that they can then say, can you help me make some changes so that I'm not encountering these big kinds of shifts in my mental health? But it also allows them to monitor larger scale changes that can occur periodically. Next slide, please. So for example, you can watch as you get big dips and changes in your own emotional state. You can watch and go, you know what, something happened here. Something was good here, something was not so good here. That provides an independent record of the actual part of the participant's mental health, an independent record of their experiences, an independent record of when something significant may or may not have occurred for them. And all of that is a useful set of tools for the participant, for sure, to engage with their own mental health. But they can then take that as a record to a mental health care practitioner of their choosing, and that allows the mental health care practitioner to take a look with them and go, okay, so everything was generally okay until here, and then things started to get to trouble. What happened here? And that can expedite treatment gains, that can improve the diagnostic capacities of the people involved, and it can allow the ongoing monitoring to really allow for patients to work with clinicians to get people who are experiencing mental health injury back to normal again that much faster, or back to healthy rather again that much faster. Next slide, please. So because we're also trying to see whether or not we can get away from exclusively relying on self-report, not because I don't think self-report is good, but because that's a long-standing set of questions. Can we move away from self-report exclusively? We've started using a new tool called the LLA device. It's a biometric assessment device. This is essentially a seismocardiogram that measures heart performance, not reliant entirely on ECG, but actually reliant on SCG. This allows for a depth of measurement and a depth of monitoring that hasn't been possible before on an individual basis. So this is brand new technology. We're very excited about this technology because it allows for people to monitor their heart in a very specific set of ways. And it provides us with feedback that allows us to understand how the heart changes over time. And at the risk of sounding like a cliche, well, certainly our heartstrings can get pulled by all kinds of environmental variables. And this device can help us to measure when those heartstrings have been pulled, to identify when changes have occurred, and to pair those changes not just with physical activity or arousal, but with actual changes in psychological stress and psychological stress capacities. So this really, or capacities for, mitigating psychological stress. So it's really a bit of a quantum leap forward in technology that we're able to benefit from at this point. So we're very excited. Let me show you what happens over time. Our participants, they take about 60 seconds a day to monitor their own heart. So the device that you're seeing on the screen there, it's about the size of a toonie, maybe a little bit larger. It sits on the sternum. It takes 60 seconds in order to get the recording, and then that information gets passed into a software system and analyzed, and then fed back as a set of readings to our participants. Next slide, please. So I'm going to use my own data as a brief example here. So the SCG device provides a tremendous amount of feedback, but a lot of that feedback can be boiled down really into one, maybe 2 or 3 charts that allow our participants to really focus in on their experiences and how they've been impacted by their experiences by providing a biological measure of the psychological impact of an experience they've had. And we're already seeing good results with this. So this is me. And actually, you can see where I've got the little red dots there, or sorry, the red circles there over the blue dots. These line up very nicely with periods where I was experiencing particularly high levels of stress. So I can actually look back and go, yeah, you know what, in October, I've actually got a biological measure that shows that I wasn't just experiencing increased levels of arousal, for example, because I was working out or because I was active or because I was particularly excited about watching a movie or doing something else. You can actually watch that my heart's performance in that 1 minute a day measurement changed, and that change was associated with different stressful periods throughout the last several months that I've been doing the monitoring. So this really is a huge step forward on a lot of fronts. We're very excited about it, but it is also brand new technology. And so we're looking forward to publishing on this soon and having replications so that hopefully we can identify whether this really is a robust enough tool for us to use it, maybe for ongoing mental health measurements, maybe even more than that. Next slide, please. And you can see that the ongoing measurement isn't just dedicated to mental health. We actually see that the ongoing measurement works on physical health as well. So because of existing data that has been collected by cardiac-related researchers all around the world, we already know, for example, that you can compare my own readings, these are still my readings, you can compare my own readings to what we would expect for some of my height, weight, and age, and you can determine whether or not I'm literally demonstrating heart responses that are consistent with my own age, a younger age, or an older age. And you can see here, if you remember from the last slide, that this actually maps on very closely to the stress that I was experiencing during those times. So you can actually watch that the added stress is having a negative impact on my heart. You can also, though, watch, though, that I can intervene, and that's something that our heart-related team researchers are very quick to remind everybody, that you can actually intervene and make changes. It's one of the wonderful things, as I understand it, about how the heart interacts with the mind and the body. You can do things, make changes that allow you to actually then watch your heart improve over time. So you can see early October there, I'm getting a little older in my heart measurements there, but then you can also watch that I was able to take specific actions, make changes to my diet, my exercise, my lifestyle choices with respect to stress and workload. You can actually watch my heart get younger again. And I'm very pleased because across the board there, for the most part, most of the measurements are younger than my actual age, which is, you know, very delightful for me. Next slide, please. So one of the major things that we're trying to do with the study is to demonstrate the effectiveness of this augmented training. So let's talk a little bit about the augmented training. We want to demonstrate the effectiveness of something called the Unified Protocol. The Unified Protocol has already demonstrated effectiveness as a treatment for people who've been experiencing one or more mental health injuries. In fact, there's more than 70 randomized controlled trials that have demonstrated that applying the Unified Protocol, which is a treatment to persons who are having difficulty with one or more mental health disorders, provides large effect sizes for large portions of the people who receive the treatment. It's a heavy skills-based set of interventions though, and this provides for us a lot of opportunity. So if it's working for people who already have a mental health injury, people who have PTSD, people who have panic disorder, people who have major depressive disorder, across a variety of delivery formats, which we know from all of these randomized controlled trials that it does, that provides us with a potential opportunity to use it as a proactive training tool. Next slide, please. So can we take the skills that we provide to patients afterwards, which are cognitive behavioral therapy skills from a transdiagnostic cognitive behavioral therapy, and place those into early training as part of an integrated mental health training program? Now, there's some initial support already that this does work from a randomized controlled trial with participants who are reporting elevated non-clinical though symptoms of depression and anxiety. So we've got initial evidence already that taking these skills and giving them to people before they have a mental health challenge does appear to reduce the probability that they're going to meet criteria for a mental health disorder later on. So that's really important information for us. Next slide, please. All of this is what led us many years ago to take the Unified Protocol as one of the cognitive behavioral therapies and make several adaptations to it. And this took months of collaborative effort between us and the RCMP and various clinicians in order to essentially tailor the treatment program and turn it from a treatment into a component of training that could be seamlessly integrated into all aspects of Depot, so that essentially we can provide 13 weeks of didactic training to new Depot cadets, new RCMP cadets, and those 13 weeks of training show them how to use the Unified Protocol skills. So they're taking treatment skills, learning how to use them while they're experiencing the rest of their training at Depot. But we're doing even more than that. We're integrating it thanks to tremendous help and tremendous work being done by the 200 plus facilitators and trainers at Depot. We're going to integrate reminders about those cognitive behavioral therapy skills all throughout the rest of Depot training. This is a very essentially high dose that we're giving. So essentially what we're saying is we're going to teach you how to use the skills, and then all of your trainers while you're at Depot for 26 weeks are going to take multiple opportunities to remind you, to cue you, you're having difficulties right now. This is a particularly stressful situation. It's a stressful situation, not unlike the stressors you'll experience when you're deployed. So tell me what skills you're using right now. So we've essentially will build 200 plus persons who are well trained in using these CBT skills and are going to have the repeated opportunity to remind the RCMP cadets to use the skills. Ideally, what we're hoping this will do is allow for the RCMP cadets that are coming out of Team 2 to leave very, very skilled in using evidence-based skills already to protect their mental health as part of just their everyday life. So we're hoping that this is going to provide them with essentially advanced resilience training and protection for their own mental health. Next slide, please. So where are we at right now? Well, we've completed recruitment for Team 1. We're training the depot trainers right now with my extreme gratitude for all of their support, because it requires tremendous commitment from the depot team across all of their team members in order to make this work. And we are in the process of revising the depot, finishing the revisions to the depot training, and we were going to start recruitment in April of 2022 for that, but I think that's been moved out by just a couple of weeks. So we're very excited about the fact that Team 2, all of those cadets are going to be starting in the next few weeks, and they will be receiving this brand new kind of training as an integrated, seamless component to the CTP that's currently at depot. Next slide, please. So for Team 1, we've got interim analyses that are already underway because we have lots of data already from Time 1 and Time 2, even Time 3 and now Time 4 from Team 1, because there was a slight gap caused by COVID-19. And what we know so far at a very preliminary stage is that it appears that that their mental health at Time 1 and Time 2 is generally consistent with our hypotheses. In fact, it appears that they actually have better mental health at Time 1 and Time 2 than the general population, which is very exciting and stands in contrast to a lot of the extant literature and a lot of the stigma-based literature that has existed for 100+ years now. It also looks like the monitoring and the participation in the study is associated with improvements in mental health, even for the people who are already generally mentally healthy. So we're very excited about that. Our formal results are going to be submitted for peer review in the next few weeks, actually, before being made public, but we're super excited to share those with everybody that we can. Next slide, please. A lot of the cadets have discussed with their friends and family that they have support from them to participate. Lots of them have commented to us that they know how important mental health is over their career, and that they know that they're more likely to experience a psychological injury than a physical injury. A lot of the cadets are also encouraging each other to participate. We've heard that they've, even out in the field, they're encouraging one another to continue to participate as part of our Team 1, and they're hoping Team 2 is going to continue to participate with as much vigor as Team 1. Lots of comments are coming back with things like, I want to thank the RCMP for taking such an interest in my mental health and my mental well-being. Members themselves have also expressed a lot of interest in participating because we've had a lot of privilege working with the members of the RCMP, and they themselves are watching what the cadets are getting. And one of the more common comments is, how soon before we're going to be able to have access to these tools? How soon before we can have access to the training? And the answer is, we hope very soon. Next slide, please. So for those of you who are interested in all of the academic details, we're thrilled that our protocol paper for this study is going to be published this fall in Health Promotion and Chronic Disease Prevention in Canada, Research Policy and Practice. This is a terrific journal. It'll be made open access so that everybody can go over the individual details that we're very excited to share. Next slide, please. So last, but certainly not least, before we just pass it to Dr. Kratzek for a quick summary, we're very excited that the RCMP, in their leadership role for mental health in this case, paved the way for an extension study to other public safety personnel. And this is something that we're very delighted the Canadian Institutes of Health Research have funded as part of the consortium between CIPSRT and CIHR. So we're taking all of the protocols that we've built for the RCMP, which is being called the RCMP protocol right now for shorthand. So the monitoring, the platform, the tools, all of that, and we've been able to extend that to 200 currently serving firefighters, municipal police, paramedics, and public safety communicators, mostly in Saskatchewan, some in Ontario and Manitoba. And those people are now in the process of making use, those participants, of making use of the monitoring, and they are being given the modified unified protocol, which we're calling the ERST, the Emotional Resilience Skills Training Protocol. They're being given that training themselves so that we can evaluate the impact on currently serving members. So if we do the exact same thing that we're doing for the RCMP Depot Cadets, and we provide that for currently serving members, how does that impact them? Does it provide them with supports? Does the monitoring provide them with supports? We're using that also to demonstrate that this is more than a proof of concept, that you can actually extend this to other groups, and then also to get their feedback on what kinds of improvements would need to be made to do a broader scale deployment to hopefully at some point support all 350,000 public safety personnel across the country. So you can learn more about that on our website at sasptsistudy.ca. But we'll hopefully have a protocol paper about that very soon. So Dr. Kratzek, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you. I was having some problems with video and sound there for a while, so sorry about that. So you can go to the next slide. The RCMP, you know, I'm very proud to say that we're a global leader in this area. Through my travels, I work with a lot of different international police agencies, from the United States to the United Kingdom, Australia, and so on. And there's a lot of attention being placed on this study. I'm constantly fielding questions. I'm constantly being asked for updates on results. You know, so there is a tremendous amount of interest in this study and the outcomes of this study. So I don't think that can be understated at all or overstated at all. While this is an RCMP study, it clearly is going to benefit all public safety personnel, whether they're in Canada, the United States, or anywhere in the world. I mean, the issue of PTSIs and occupational stress injuries is a global issue. And I'm just proud to say that, you know, between the University of Regina and the RCMP, we're taking those first steps to really address PTSI head on. Over the past number of years, especially as we've, you know, talked more about resiliency and addressing PTSI, we have seen lots of different, you know, groups or companies come out and say we have a program for you that's going to cure all of your ills. And the issue that I have often had is that none of these are evidence-based. A lot of them are evidence-informed. Some of them are best practices. Some of them, you know, just they're cobbling stuff together. This is the first time that I've really seen an evidence-based approach to addressing PTSI. And maybe I'm being a little bit biased here, but I think this is really important if we're going to really address the issues that are in front of us right now, regardless of whether you're a police officer, EMS, or fire, or whatever. As long as you're a public safety personnel or military, we need to find better solutions, evidence-based solutions to this problem. Otherwise, we're going to continue to sit at 30%. And this study is going to allow us to do that. I can tell you as well that at the end of last fiscal year, PTSD was the #1 benefit claim for the RCMP. And it was steadily rising over the last 5 to 6 years. And for the first time, it became the #1 reason. So we have a long way to go, and we owe it to everybody to address this issue head on. Dr. Carleton.
Thanks very much, Dr. Kratzek. Next slide. I think that's our presentation, Emily. So we tried very hard between Dr. Kratzek and I to stay actually on time, and I think we might be, which is a first for me.
You are.
Wow.
It's pretty good. All right, so I'm going to open up the floor to questions. Again, you can submit it through the questions box, or you can raise your hand in order to ask the question. I'm just going to stop sharing my screen here so it doesn't get in the way. And so we do have someone who has a raised hand. I'm going to go ahead and unmute you. The first name is Julie. So Julie, you should be able to go ahead. You are self-muted, but I have unmuted you so that you can ask your question. So if you just want to unmute yourself and ask your question, you're free to do so. Can you hear me, Julie? Okay, maybe she can't unmute. All right, let's go to the questions box and see what we have. So I have one kind of comment here. Let me just read here. They've developed an assessment device. So he has developed an assessment device in 1967-68 for my dissertation. Use reaction time and emotionally weighted words. Fed results to counselors to use in session. You might be interested in the results. I also used high-risk assessment in college populations and have some ideas for that and work with the Coast Guard. Feel free to call me. So I will pass that information on to you. Next question is, how would you scale this to a larger population?
That's a terrific question. It's certainly one of the deliverables that we have going back to the Government of Canada at this point. I think the scalability for the assessment part is really a technology question coupled with a coordination question across the country for clinical assessments. So this is something that we're actively working on right now to figure out the scalability. We're working on it within the RCMP because certainly they have more than 1,000 members who are participating. They've got about 20,000 members. So we're actively working on that. Scaling the training out to all members of to all 350,000 people. I think that's also on our to-do list. It's one thing to have it perhaps be made permanent at depot if the RCMP chooses to do that. It's another thing to try and integrate it into the training for PSP across the entire country. That's a very large scale endeavor, and I'm not trying to suggest we shouldn't do it. But I guess I would also suggest that we want to be very careful about the idea that any training as a one and done is ever going to be appropriate. The one and done training, there's no data that supports that across any of the things that we're seeing, certainly not for our PSP. So if you're talking about scaling, not just across size, but across time, I think it's going to require a concerted effort of a lot of different groups of people in order to make that scale work. And before we do that as a community, we want to make sure that we have an evidence-based set of skills and tools before we invest in that as a community.
Yeah.
Dr. Kratzek, did you want to weigh in there?
Yeah, I think, we're starting the emotional resiliency skills training with cadets starting in June. And I mean, we're really excited about what that is going to offer our cadets and the support it's going to offer cadets and members going forward. I think once we start to see the results of those efforts after they get into the field, I think that's going to be one of the really exciting things. I mean, we're seeing some really neat things right now, some very exciting positive outcomes from the study in a relatively short period of time, which I can kind of talk about a little bit more than Dr. Carleton can right now, but we're getting some positive outcomes. Let's just leave it at that. We'll wait until the articles come out. But I think we're going to see a real shift once the ERST training has been rolled out to cadets, and once once we get the first, second year in the field. I think that's what we're going to get. We're getting some positive feedback right now from our members that are getting the training, and we have members that are currently using it. So I think where there's a will, there's a way. I think if we're going to scale this up to our 20,000 or whatever service it is, I think once we have those results, I think it's going to be easier to scale it, because there's going to be that sense of urgency. We need to scale it, if we get really good positive results out of it, not just, should we do this? Once we have the results, I think scaling it up is something that we're going to have to do.
Okay, thank you for that, guys. Next question is, did you find a correlation between the self-report data and the heart rhythm data?
Yes, we found several relationships there. I would need Dr. Neary, who's our cardio specialist, in order to really provide those. But yes, there is a relationship between the physiological data that we're receiving and the psychological data. And the relationship goes beyond the arousal relationships that we've seen in literature so far. It's not because they're all arousal relationships, but it's difficult to tease that apart, right? Because my heart rate might change as a function of any number of emotional experiences, and the technology that we're seeing from the LLA device is allowing us to narrow that from, am I just excited because I'm about to get to eat a bag of Oreo cookies, or am I worried or upset? And that's why my heart rate is going up, because of something that has happened to me. So we're able to tease that apart. We are seeing relationships statistical relationships between those already. And we're very excited to be able to showcase those in some of the coming publications.
Okay. I'm just going to pop up the first slide for people with the stats, just because there is a request, just because they've missed them. So I'm just popping those up there to share. Next question is, does your study point to peer support as a source of healing for the issues you're studying, such as with OSI CAN?
Well, I think peer support is really important. I was raised, so to speak, in a peer support environment. That's where my training was. I think peer support is a huge component of the delivery of ongoing mental health. I think it's part of the stepped care that goes along with mental health. Our peers are often some of the second or third groups of people that we talk to about our mental health, and preceded only by usually our spouses or our immediate family members. So I think they play a huge role. I also think that what we may see is that at Depot, in many cases, it's peers training peers. So if we provide them all with the same IRST skills, and they're able to help each other with skills that we know work for people who've got a mental health injury, that gives the peers confidence in the messaging that they're providing back to their own people, to their own peers, to each other, and helps to reinforce, I think, the entire system of using evidence-based skills to protect mental health. So I certainly think there's opportunities there, and I think you definitely need peer engagement if you're going to roll something out to hundreds of thousands of people, that's for sure.
So next question is, does the study include shortage of members as being a potential problem with PTSI? So maybe, does it account for it, I guess?
I'm not sure that I understand the question. I think what you're asking is the study going to be able to assess the impact of some of the structural challenges facing not only RCMP, but all police and all PSP right now, in that we need many more PSP actively on the front line than we actually currently have available in our population. I think that's what you're asking. Assuming that that is what you're asking, those are variables that we're measuring for sure, and we're hoping that we're going to be able to statistically assess for some of those impacts. But those are system level impacts that are impacting all PSP, certainly our police, but not only our police. And so sort of like COVID, right? Like you've got something that's impacting an entire population, measuring the actual impact of just that becomes more challenging, but we do have variables to try and assess that. Dr. Krasik, did you want to weigh in there?
No, I think you've covered that just fine. Yeah.
Okay. So next question: how would the Hawthorne effect, participants delivering what they think researcher wants, showed up in the research? How has it showed up in the research or in your research?
So Hawthorne effect can impact any number of different aspects of any number of pieces of research. So they know that they're being monitored. I think the Hawthorne effect, though, in this case, the Hawthorne effect is a double-edged sword at any given time. Most of the time it impacts single studies. In this case, the fact that you're being monitored, the fact that you're being observed, you're being constantly observed. And if you are an attendee at Depot, the Depot cadets are being constantly observed all the time, no matter what. So I think if there's an initial observer bias or impact there, I certainly don't think it lasts very long. We're also not seeing any evidence of a pervasive problem with reporting biases or showing good or showing bad, if you will. So if it is having an impact, I would suggest that there's no indication that it's a particularly large impact or a particularly lasting impact. If you're talking about expectancy effects, well, I'm happy to play into the idea of expectancy effects. I hope that any expectancy effect that we get will be terrific with respect to the IRST. That said, that's why I also have a control group, right? So the standard training group is not receiving any of the IRST, so that comparison should help us to really tease apart just how much of this is expectancy or monitoring and how much of this is the impact of training. That's assuming I've understood your question.
Yeah, I would agree with you on that too. And I think if anything, when cadets, I think they'll just walk away from the study, and we've seen that. Cadets that are participating are doing a really good job with it, but this is just part of one of a gazillion things that they have to do here at Depot, and like Nick said, they're being watched absolutely all the time anyways. So I mean, this is something they're used to, but we see lapses all the time. So I don't think Hawthorne effect is something I don't think it's a thing for us to worry about at all.
Unless, and it does occur to me, sorry, I'm 1 second. It does occur to me that if you're asking whether the Hawthorne effect might benefit them with respect to monitoring their own behavior, so in that they're doing their own monitoring and that's influencing their decisions to make better health choices, yes, and we're already seeing evidence that we see statistical evidence already from our current data set that that's true. So if that's how you were interpreting Hawthorne effect, then yes, in that case, I certainly think it's having an impact, and that's the impact that we're expecting from the self-monitoring.
Okay. The next question is, within your studies, have or will there be any focus dedicated to evaluating PTSI and conduct-related issues?
Sorry, yeah, I mean, that's not something that we're going to be able to do based on how the study is designed, confidentiality and anonymity. We cannot tie back any of the conduct, any performance issues in the field with the study, because that information is never linked together.
Okay.
Yeah, the study was painstakingly designed to allow for true anonymity to occur for our participants. So we don't know who's participating. After we hand out the devices to the cadets, we rapidly lose track of who's participating, and any number of them could send the devices back, so we don't know who's participating, and we have no way of identifying a specific person.
Which is very, very challenging for the study.
For all of the researchers who might be joining us today, you can only imagine how challenging doing that in real time over a longitudinal period like this would actually be, and it certainly has been. But we feel like it's been a huge boon in many ways to help protect, to help encourage and support participation, to make sure we're getting the most honest answers possible from our participants, and to support their ongoing engagement.
Perfect. Is there any plan to offer this program to frontline and community staff within correctional services, either federally or provincially?
My goodness, I certainly hope so. I would have a lot of answering back to do to Dr. Rose Richard-Ellie if I didn't, and she'd be the first in a long line. I think the idea is, if we can evidence that it works, that yes, I think our correctional services team, our correctional workers, broadly speaking, officers and all of the correctional workers, I think if we can showcase that it works for them, for the RCMP rather, I would fully expect that we would find every way possible to extend it to our correctional workers as well.
Okay, so this says not a question. Oh, go ahead. Sorry, go ahead.
If I can just say, I know that there is interest from Correctional Services Canada. We have our folks, our counterparts, between the RCMP at the DG level, have talked to Correctional Services several times, and we've also had several conversations with CSIS as well. So there is a lot of interest, and they just need to find a path forward.
Okay, perfect. All right, so the next one says, not a question, just a comment. I'm the Divisional Wellness Coordinator for the RCMP in Nova Scotia. On behalf of the regular members, we would like to thank you for your hard work on the study, and we are waiting very patiently to hear about the tools that members can use to improve their health.
Thank you very, very much. We appreciate your patience and your support, and we're very eager to get it out. We're pushing as fast as we can, I assure you. So thank you very much, and thank you. Thank you very, very much. We're eager to have those tools too.
Perfect. All right, next question is there a plan to roll this out to the families of the PSP?
That's a really smart question. I think that I think the short answer is, while there isn't a plan, there is certainly a notion that we should be. Dr. Heidi Cram is leading several families-related initiatives. She's one of our team members on the initial extension project that I mentioned. So again, I think if the tools hold, I think it would be wise for us to make sure that our PSP families have access to those tools, not only so that they can use the tools to support PSP themselves, but because every bit of data that we have so far suggests that the same tools that are helping to support the mental health of our PSP would also help to support the mental health of PSP family members, who in and of themselves have their own needs and their own challenges that they're facing as a function of being a family member of a PSP. So I think we would be eager to do it. I think we're running into some capacity issues for how fast we can spread everybody out and get it out, but I don't think it's very far from our radar, so to speak, to do it. I don't think we have an active plan, but I would be very surprised if we didn't have an active plan to do so in the next 18 to 24 months.
Okay, perfect. So we've got 2 questions left in about 3 minutes, just so you know. Excellent presentation and review of this work. It really is an amazing effort. How has COVID had an impact on this work? And were you able to include any COVID data to include as a confounder variable?
I need like 20 minutes to answer that question, but the short version is COVID has had a substantive impact. It's been irritating, to say the least, from a design perspective. It functionally split our team 1 in half because Depot, for the first time in history, had to close because of COVID. And so half of our participants had to go home, and we had to start over again to collect the data for our team 1 because Depot had closed. So we are going to check it as a confounding variable. We are going to be assessing it as a COVID, or sorry, a covariant, COVID as a covariant, and we'll certainly make that available in the analyses. Greg, Dr. Kratzek, I don't know if you wanted to add something.
Yeah, you know, and you're right. I mean, I'd be surprised if we don't see something. And as Dr. Carleton said, you know, we'll look at the data. You know, when cadets did come back, and they came back in November of 2020, so right in the heat of the pandemic, you know, they had to go in 2 weeks isolation. They could not intermingle with other troops. They couldn't even intermingle within the troop. They had to stick with you know, they couldn't leave base. So there was a lot of restrictions put on our cadets. So, you know, I'd be surprised if we don't see something up here because of that.
All right, last question for the day. When collecting biofeedback in regards to SEG and ECG, is heart rate variability being looked at? Also, did the 4% for alcohol use disorder seem underreported in your opinion? So 2 questions from 1 person.
2 questions, 1 person, 1 minute. Yes, HRV will be being assessed as a function of both what we originally were recording, which was ECG, and then also for the SCG. I'd need a lot more time to go into those details there, but you'll find a lot of those details in the protocol paper, and we're certainly happy to share those if you're interested. And I think you should be, because it is very interesting, so I'm glad you asked. As for the 4%, I actually don't think that it was underreported for RCMP. And the reason that I don't think it was underreported for RCMP is because of the structural limitations that RCMP often face. So an RCMP officer could be deployed, for example, to Northern Saskatchewan. They simply don't have the opportunity to be able to engage in enough problematic behavior. It's not the opportunity. They don't have as much opportunity to engage in problematic behavior because they could be on call essentially 24 hours a day for weeks on end, if need be. And so it's not that they might not be having a challenge, it's that the report and how we measure it might not accurately reflect challenges that they were experiencing because of the structural challenges that they face. And that's a short version. Again, I could do 20 minutes just caveating that. So thank you for the question, and I'd love to talk about it more later if you're interested.
All right, sounds good. I just want to thank Dr. Carleton and Dr. Kratzek and everyone in the audience for this great session. There will be a quick survey at the end of the town hall. We hope that you'll take a moment to complete it. CPSRT does host monthly town halls on topics specific to PSP. If there's something you want to learn more about, let us know in the survey. Next month's town hall is on May 12th and will feature an event co-hosted with the Families Matters Research Group. This will be an interactive session, and it will be focused on how to communicate about trauma. So please watch the CPSRT website for more details or subscribe to our mailing list. Once again, thank you everyone for attending today. Dr. Carleton, the ops staff at CPSRT would love a chance to use that biomonitoring to check our stress. I'm sure everybody else in the audience would too. But for everybody out there, please take care and stay safe.